Hello, everybody. This is a presentation on the Book of Enoch, an in-depth look at the fallen angels, end-time prophecies, and the Son of Man by Todd Armstrong, who that is me. My website is emmanuelkingman.com, IMMANUEL Kingman, just as it sounds, .com. And there you can find all of my other work. You can find my podcast there. You can find my different blogs and photos and all that type of stuff if you are interested after you watch this. So this is the Book of Enoch, and it is mind-blowing. This is not the type of presentation that anyone's ever heard about on the Book of Enoch. This is vastly different. I have really gone in depth, and between my psychic abilities, with my third eye being active, and I see things as I read them and as I hear things, I start to see a picture in my mind. And not only that, but I receive these intuitive thoughts on a regular basis. And this presentation is a mixture of me reading this Book of Enoch multiple times, listening to dramatic readings of the Book of Enoch multiple times, and then really combing through it. And, these things just come to me, and I connect things very easily that when you put them together, it blows your mind because it makes more sense than anything else. So I hope you are all going to learn something. Now, that's going to be in different sections. Today is just the introduction to the Book of Enoch, as well as the angels and fallen angels. All right, so let's get in it. So you got the tale of two Enochs. You got Enoch, the son of Cain. He is the third generation from Adam. He had a city built in his name. And then you have Enoch, the son of Jared, is the seventh generation from Adam. He was born 1,000 years before the flood. He was Noah's great-grandfather. He has been claimed to have walked with God. He lived 365 years and never died, but instead transformed into Archangel Metatron. Excuse me. So, the son of Cain is not the Enoch that we are focusing on. We will be focusing on the son of Jared. This is the Enoch that everybody's so familiar with. So, that's the difference when someone is curious about the two Enochs. There's not really much about the son of Cain, other than what I have here. I mean, maybe there's a few other little things, but there's not really anything on them. When the other Enoch, we have so much information about. All right, so you got three different texts. You got one Enoch, two Enoch, and three Enoch. Now, one Enoch is the Ethiopic Book of Enoch, written around the same time as Genesis. It is a composite of 6 main parts by several authors between 3rd century BC and 1st century AD. Oral traditions go back much earlier. So this is the text that people are most familiar with, those who are familiar with the Book of Enoch, or those who have at least heard of it. That's the Book of Enoch that's being referenced. 2 Enoch is the Slavonic Secrets of Enoch. 7th century AD is around the time where it came to be, and it is at best corrupted. Now, 2 Enoch is heavily focused on the calendar portion of the 3 Enochs. So it gives us a very in-depth look at the calendar, how that works, and why it is the way it is. And it's very repetitive in the way that it explains things. So that will be somewhat used for the calendar section when I get into the section about time and the calendar. That is a part of that. And 3 Enoch is the Hebrew Book of Enoch, written by Rabbi Ishmael, who was taken to heaven and spoke directly with Metatron. and he lived between the years 90 AD and 300 AD. I don't think he was alive that whole time. I think that it was somewhere in that range, is more what the years mean, 90 to 300 AD. So you see, you have 3 different books from 3 different time periods, and this can be a confusing thing for some people. So I have read all 3 actually, and the third one is all about Metatron. It is all about how this Rabbi Ishmael, he went on some kind of vision, some kind of excursion, whether it was a dream, a psychedelic trip, a meditation. It's not clear on how he got there, but he got there and he was in front of Metatron, and he asked Metatron who he was, and it was Enoch. The same Enoch that one Enoch comes from, the son of Jared. And it gets into a whole lot of different things. There's about 20 different Yahwehs. There's so much repetitive nature. Again, it talks so much about the same things, mentioning them over and over again, that the only conclusion one can come to is that what is being shown is a infinite fractal, and they're little discs or record shapes that lay on top of each other, but they encompass a whole sphere. And there is a beginning and an end to it, but he's just seeing the same thing being repeated, as if they're stacked on top of each other. And that's how he describes a lot of it. Now, one Enoch, you have to realize Enoch was 1,000 years before the flood. So he only lived to be 365 years. I say only because that was about half the age of everyone else in his time period, but he didn't die. He was taken up to heaven after 365 years to become Metatron. He was transformed into Metatron. So when we're talking about the book was written between 3rd century BC and 1st century AD, that is misleading because the oral traditions go back much earlier. And Enoch is the scribe of God. He is described as the scribe very often in here, called that by the fallen angels, called that by the good angels that are still in heaven. He is the scribe, so he writes things down. So the oral traditions have to go back to when he lived, which was 3,000 years before Jesus, 3,300 and some odd years before Jesus. It's important to know because the book of Genesis, while it came out around the same time in between the 3rd and 2nd century BC, it's important to understand that the book of Genesis probably came from the book of Enoch, because the book of Enoch was a oral tradition. It was being passed around to everybody and spoken about. So Genesis has as many of the same, I don't want to say too many, but it has the same quotes in it in different parts, except the book of Enoch expands on those different lines in a more complete way. So the way Genesis describes things, while it's not completely the same thing, the book of Genesis and the book of Enoch are 2 very different things, but there's just certain topics in there that are discussed, and those are probably derived from Enoch in his storytelling. And it's important to know all of that, because the book, or the Bible, is really heavily influenced by the book of Enoch. Not just the book of Genesis, but also other books that we'll get to in a moment. So who's Archangel Metatron? Metatron had been the Hebrew prophet Enoch and became an ascended master whom God transformed into the powerful Archangel Metatron. In Genesis 5:24, we learn that Enoch walked with God and he was not, for God took him. So there you go. Genesis 5:24 mentions Enoch. Okay? Just as I was saying, Genesis came from Enoch. It's a direct line right there. According to Gershom Shalom, the Hebrew mystic and scholar, the prophet Enoch's flesh was turned to flame, his veins to fire, his eyelashes to flashes of lightning, his eyeballs to flaming torches. He whom God placed on a throne next to the throne of glory received after this heavenly transformation the name Metatron. And what he's saying here is Enoch going from a physical 3D being into a metaphysical 5D being. Okay, if anyone has ever had experiences with psychedelics, with lucid dreaming, with meditations, and you go on some kind of adventure, or just not even a lucid dream, just a regular dream, if you can bring that back to you, you can kind of see that everything is kind of like an outline. It's kind of outlined in different colors, like if you were to make a blueprint of a home, the way that you just have the edges have color to them. That is how it appears when you're in the 4D astral realm. So his flesh turning to flame, his veins turning to fire, his eyelashes to flashes of lightning, and his eyeballs to flaming torches. What that is meaning is that the physical nature, some kind of scan, so to speak, is going over Enoch, and he's turning into an astral being right in front of everyone's eyes. And the throne next to the throne of glory is the throne of glory being the one for the Son of Man. Alright, and we'll get to that later. So in this way, Archangel Metatron is one of the most powerful archangels in this new age because he directly represents our capacity for ascension and our ability to access spiritual power. Now, what does this mean? Ascension, right? Would be what happened to Enoch. He ascended from Enoch to Metatron without dying, right in front of several witnesses' faces. And he is now the leader of the archangels because he had loved God so much and had proven his love to God so much that God decided to make him the one that we will all, kind of look towards. And he's not the Son of Man. It's made clear to Rabbi Ishmael in 3 Enoch when he starts to believe, like, oh, everyone's bowing down to Enoch so much that he must be God. So God sent someone who was higher than Enoch, which there aren't very many, and sent him to give Enoch Metatron at that point, 60 lashes, just to prove that that's not the Almighty. So while that might sound like it's kind of messed up, it's, it is what it is. God just proven, like, no, if Metatron was God, then he wouldn't suffer through this because he'd be the Almighty. So this was just to prove a point. Alright, so then we got the other books that are mentioned in the Bible. We got the Book of Jasher, the Book of Wars of the Lord, the Annals of Yehu, the Book of Kings, the Book of Records, the Book of the Chronicles of Ahasuerus, the Acts of Solomon, the Sayings of Hosea, the Chronicles of King David, the Chronicles of Samuel, Nathan, Gad, Samuel's book, the records of Nathan the prophet, the prophecy of Ahijah the Shilonite, the treatise of the prophet Edo. And why do I say that? That is just for anyone out there who is going to say, oh, the Book of Enoch doesn't count because it's not in the Bible. Well, it was taken out of the Bible. It used to be in the Bible, and it still actually is in the Bible in Ethiopia, the only place that still practices having the the Book of Enoch as part of its canon. And Ethiopia is an interesting place. That's where the Ark of the Covenant was before it got raided, and a lot of people died from the raid. And this was in 2020. That a bunch of people, a bunch of priests and other church people affiliated with the church, they were all, not all of them, but a lot of them were killed, and all of them were really hurt. So this was from people trying to steal the Ark of the Covenant, which is super interesting that this would happen at this time, because the Book of Enoch says that that the Book of Enoch was written for a civilization that has not yet been, is a far way off, which, would be us. And the Ethiopia, it's just as another side note, has a different calendar. They use the calendar from the Book of Enoch, which I will talk about later on as I get into that section. But it's just very interesting. The name of the terrorists that tried stealing the Ark of the Covenant are called the Eritrean Defense Forces. So if anyone was looked at, that's who's claimed anyway, because it wasn't announced for like 3 or 4 months afterwards by the media that this had occurred. Alright, so the Book of Enoch is referenced by the Bible. It's directly quoted in several New Testament books: Jude, Peter, Luke, Matthew, John, as well as what I told you about the Book of Genesis. Yeah, it has direct parallels with the Book of Genesis. Jesus often spoke using direct quotes from the Book of Enoch, and these are just some Bible references that are all throughout the Book of Enoch are the Son of Man, the Elect One, the Righteous One, and the Lord of Spirits. These are all things that the Bible mentions, and they come from the Book of Enoch. Alright, so here's some of the comparisons of Jesus and Enoch quotes. They're very similar. They're not word for word, and even if they aren't influenced by, I'm not suggesting that Jesus and Enoch are the same person while I'm doing this. What I'm showing is that Jesus was saying the same things that Enoch said. So whether or not he learned these from the Book of Enoch, or these are just things that he learned separately, they line up very well. So you guys can pause the video and look at those if you like. And here's some more. Alright, and then Tartaria. I put this in the beginning because there's only the 2 connections right here that you see. But it's very interesting that, researching Tartaria recently, and these types of things come up. So right in Enoch 1:6, it says, "And the high mountains will be shaken, and the high hills shall be made low, and shall melt like wax before the flame," which is mud floods, which is soil liquefaction, which is, alleged. This goes along with the conspiracy theory of Tartaria, that's what you want to call it, the alternative history of Tartaria and the mud floods that covered it up, that we see the evidence for all over the place. Well, it's right in Enoch 1:6. It says it'll happen. And then Uriel, or Uriel, is one of the holy angels. He takes Enoch on most of the trips throughout the Book of Enoch. And he is over the world and over Tartarus. Very interesting. Over the world and over Tartarus, meaning he has dominion. This is Enoch 22, chapter 20, verse 2, where there's several verses explaining which angel, which we will get to later in this episode, but which angel does which thing and where they reside. And Uriel is the one who has dominion over the world and over Tartarus. That's where he is. Alright, so here it is, the Book of Watchers. This is what everybody knows about the Book of Enoch. They're like, the Watchers, the Watchers. Well, why are they called the Watchers? Well, I'll give you a little hint. If you look up in our sky and you see luminaries, which we call stars, and the moon and the sun, they are doing what? They are watching the earth. They are lighting the way for the earth. Just remember that. Alright, so the fallen angels had happened during the time of Enoch's father, Jared. So when Jared was alive, the angels, they fell and they came down. And there's all their names. I'm not going to say them all, but it's very interesting. You know, Samyaza is their leader. He is the one who's pretty famous, as well as Azazel. He's pretty well known as well. But most of them, their names end in L, E-L. And why would that be? Because El means God. Elohim is multiple God. El means God, so it means of God. And that just brings me to the thought, Lucifer, his name begins with an L because he calls himself God. So it doesn't end in an L, it begins in an L. That's just a side note. So anyway, so the fallen angels, they taught humanity charms and enchantments, the cutting of roots, which is, I believe, psychedelics, and made them acquainted with plants. And the definition of acquainted is make someone aware of or familiar with. So they started off as purely consciousness, and we may call them ghosts or apparitions, or maybe they weren't even that visible. Maybe they were completely non-visible. And they were speaking to humans, and they got the humans to eat psychedelics, which is called root cutting in the Book of Enoch. So before I hit the next point, what I want to explain is that all the myths of how psychedelics got started, especially ayahuasca, because with ayahuasca, you have these two different plants who neither of them do anything on their own, but if you put them two together, then it's a magical experience. And that and iboga, which are the two that I believe are the original two to be known. Maybe, it's just dependent on where you live, but those are the two that I really feel are the original two that were used. The people, if you hear about the stories, the people who have started these types of things said that the plants told them how to do it. That there's this myth that plants told people how to do it. But it's not the plants. It was the fallen angels. They just couldn't see the fallen angels. So they thought that the plants were talking to them. Now they could hear them somehow. They could understand them somehow. And then once they got the psychedelics in them, and anybody who's ever had a psychedelic experience, you can see, literally, you can see the 4D world, the astral world, and you could actually interact with different beings. That's how the fallen angels got in touch with humanity. Humanity was so dense, and the fallen angels, at that time, they weren't very fallen, it had just occurred, so they were still very heavenly, and there was no perception. There was no visual perception, but they could hear them. And then what happened? They got them to eat psychedelics, and from there they started mixing their consciousness with the consciousness of humans and bore out giants who had vast amounts of consciousnesses with their vessels, with their larger vessels. So the Nephilim are the Neanderthals. This is speculation by me completely, but they just align very much so in that they were larger, stronger, faster, had a larger cranium, which would lead to a larger capacity for brain size, and larger brain size tends to mean that there could be more intelligence there. Doesn't mean it's necessarily true, just means that it could be, the possibilities there. And, in my understanding, the Nephilim couldn't procreate with each other. I don't know that there were female Nephilim, but they could procreate with humans, but they couldn't procreate with each other. And that's why they died off. And I just, that's what I think is what happened when they say the Neanderthal died off. And they tell us it was a caveman and it was some dumb, I don't believe that at all. So, what this means is humans bore out giants. So, how does that happen? Well, the consciousness of the fallen, through the psychedelic use, they start becoming one with the humans, and they start living, you could say, living vicariously through the humans, in that they're making the humans do different things. And then it becomes not enough. They can't get enough, so they want to become their own physical being. So then out of that is how these giants that were 3,000 L's, which is like an L or a cubit, is 18 inches long. So if you have 18 inches times 3,000 divided by 12, you get 4,500 feet tall. And now this might sound crazy. 4,500 foot tall beings. Well, it does sound crazy. Until you realize everything used to be much larger, that we are tiny compared to what everything used to be here. Even the mainstream narrative, they tell you dinosaurs were humongous. They tell you that the plant life and the animal life was all humongous. And then we know from the end of the Ice Age that 85% of the megafauna in North America were killed off during the Ice Age. 85% of the megafauna. Now, megafauna would be like elephants, giraffes. They're about the only, maybe hippos and rhinos, they're about the only megafauna that we have today. That there used to be much, much more, and they used to be much larger. And then, we start to understand that in order to be that size, you need more oxygen and more carbon dioxide. It's the two that keeps everything as large as it does. And things die off as they don't have enough carbon dioxide or oxygen. And then things tend to grow smaller and smaller and smaller as the oxygen and carbon dioxide leak out. So that's how we get smaller over time. And because the Nephilim, they couldn't intermingle, or they couldn't reproduce amongst themselves over time when they were raping human women, or even if the human women were into it, they would make smaller and smaller beings over time. It's because they're mixing with something much smaller than them. All right, so humanity was on its own ascension course. And just to finish that up, it says in Genesis that the women would die giving birth, that they would die while pregnant from these Nephilim. I mean, it talks about it, how, some of them were able to do it, and they were made goddesses because they would just keep procreating for the Nephilim. And they were treated like queens because of it, because they were the only ones that could handle it. So anyway, humanity was on its own ascension course, where it was to learn everything it needed as its consciousness evolved. But the fallen came down here and advanced the humans too quickly, and this then became a prison planet for those who had known the secrets of heaven, for they longed to be in the heavens and didn't understand why they weren't allowed in heaven. So, right there, it's telling you So this isn't the Book of Enoch. This is me telling you the guys this. Humanity, in order to learn spiritual discernment, you have to imagine that there's nobody here. Say there's only two people here, just for sake of ease. You have Adam and Eve, and they have to learn how you're supposed to act. And it's up to them to decide how they're going to act. And they don't know what's wrong and they don't know what's right, but they learn through experience. And when they experience something wrong, and then they experience the duality of that thing, the equal and opposite side of it, they experience what's right, then you can make your choice of, do I want to do this or do I want to do this? That's how you make discernment. Does it make me feel good when I do what's wrong, or does it make me feel good when I do what's right? This is discernment. This is how you develop discernment. We didn't have that opportunity because the fallen came down here and they told us the answers to the test we didn't know we were taking. So the fallen came down after Adam and Eve, obviously. You know, it was the sixth generation at that point when they came down. And they didn't allow anyone to develop their own discernment. Everybody started knowing what the answers were. And what happens is, if you're too smart for your own good, is look at what happens with all those who are awake, that have been awake for 40 years. Look at Jordan Maxwell. You know, David Icke, Alex Jones. You know, these are big names, and maybe they're controlled opposition. Maybe they're a part of it or whatever. But just imagine that there's been non-famous people who have been awake for 40, 50, 60 years. And once they're awake, they realize they're imprisoned. They realize this is a prison. It's the same thing. It correlates exactly the same way. That humans, they knew too much and they couldn't do anything about it. And what happened was that they kept asking God why. They were no longer happy with what they had because they thought that they were being wronged. This is still happening today. They wanted to be in heaven, and what ends up happening is the Tower of Babel is created, and that they didn't get it. Like, no, this is not how you do it. This is not why you're there. It's not a prison. You were just told lies. Lies that are true, but also aren't for you, so they aren't true for you. So it became a prison planet, and from then on out, that's when people decided that sin was okay. They decided that they knew that good and evil didn't exist, that it was okay to do whatever you want, because that's what the fallen told them, that it doesn't matter, that this is duality and everything needs its equal and opposite and everything along these lines, which is true, except it's not true for those living here. For those living here, there is a very big difference between good and evil. And there's a very good reason why we are supposed to learn good and why we're supposed to learn evil. And we're supposed to learn right and wrong, and we weren't given that option. And this is the Luciferian Freemason belief today, in that everything is because God allows it, and God is the devil for putting us in this prison. And that Lucifer is the enlightened one because he came down here and told us that we're in prison and gave us the answers. And that's why they look at Lucifer as God. Oh, he was trying to free us, they say. God was imprisoning us in hell, while Lucifer came to free us and told us that it doesn't matter what we do. This is the lie. Okay, so there are 7 main transgressors, which correlate to the 7 planets that revolve around our sun, locked in forever, as Uriel describes in chapter 21:6. These are of the number of the stars of heaven, which have transgressed the commandment of the Lord, and are bound here till 10,000 years, the time entailed by their sins, are consummated. Very interesting. Okay, the 7. Why do I say 7 planets? Because if you take out the Earth, because we're on Earth, all right, you take that out. You take out Pluto, because Pluto isn't a planet, then you have the number 7. All right, the 7 main transgressors, which are bound here. I put locked in forever, but it's not forever. It's for 10,000 years. Locked in for 10,000 years. All right, it's very interesting because 10,000. Okay, Jesus was 2,000 years ago. 10,000 years before Jesus is when the Ice Age occurred. So, if they were locked in from 12,000 years ago until 2,000 years ago, and then they've been free since, well, then it kind of makes sense. I mean, that's just, I don't know that to be true or anything, but it's odd that it works out that way. Alright, the fallen angels continued. So then Uriel answered me, one of the holy angels who was with me, and said unto me, Enoch, why hast thou such fear and affright? And I answered, because of this fearful place, and because of the spectacle of the pain. And he said unto me, this place is the prison of the angels, and here they will be imprisoned forever. So this is Enoch describing when he is taken by Uriel on one of these trips. He is shown all these different places, and he said this one was so horrible. What is it for? And this is the place, the prison for the angels. And they're going to be in prison there forever for what they have done. Then Raguel, one of the holy angels who was with me, answered me and said unto me, this course of fire which thou hast seen is the fire in the west which persecutes all the luminaries of heaven. In Enoch 23:4. So this is describing hell at the end times, and is saying that the fallen angels are the luminaries. Okay, so we see the fire in the west, which could be what? The setting sun. The fire in the west, when the sun sets, that's when the luminaries of heaven are persecuted. Okay, and we say the luminaries. That's important. Remember, I told you in the beginning that the luminaries, the stars, the sun, and the moon, and I just said it again when I said the 7 planets, because planets are just wandering stars that are locked in place, locked around the sun, revolving around the sun. The sun is God, and they are locked in place, making to worship the sun for their transgressions. And the setting sun is going to persecute all the luminaries of heaven. Persecute means convict. The luminaries are the stars. Okay. So just before we go on any further, actually no, let's keep going. And these are they who judge the stars of heaven, and raise their hands against the Most High, and tread upon the earth and dwell upon it. And all their deeds manifest unrighteousness, and their power rests upon their riches, and their faith is in the gods which they have made with their hands, and they deny the name of the Lord of spirits. Enoch 46:7. Again, this is directly saying that the stars of heaven are the fallen angels. It says, and these are they who judge the stars of heaven, and raise their hands against the Most High, and tread upon the earth and dwell upon it. So this is saying that the stars of heaven came down to earth, clear as day. And other forms I saw hidden in that place. I heard the voice of the angel saying, these are the angels who descended to the earth, and revealed what was hidden to the children of men, and seduced the children of men into committing sin. That's Enoch 64, verses 1 and 2. This is when Enoch sees one of the hell realms, and is explained why it exists and who it is for. So again, this is different than any of the other passages I just read. And again, it's telling you that what I just said in the last two, Enoch 46:7 and Enoch 64:1 and 2, is saying the same thing. It's the stars of heaven are the angels. Treading upon the earth and dwelling upon it is the angels who descended to the earth and revealed what was hidden to the children of men and seduced the children of men into committing sin. All right, so here is another one. And again, I saw with mine eyes as I slept, and I saw the heaven above, and behold, a star fell from heaven, and it arose, and it ate, and, well, it should say ate, but it was typed that way, and pastured amongst those oxen. Enoch 89:1. Another verse directly stating that the fallen angels are stars. This one saying that it is an oxen. That's how this was a dream he was describing to Methuselah. That the star came down to heaven and then was an ox and was amongst them. So here we go, the next one. And again I saw in the vision and looked towards the heaven, and behold, I saw many stars descend and cast themselves down from heaven to that first star, and they became bulls amongst those cattle and pastured with them. That's Enoch 89:3. So it's another line stating that the fallen are stars, and this also explains the bull worship, which is Baal. I mean, if you're here, you've probably heard of Baal before, or Baal, however you say it, B-A''A'-L. That these last two are right in the same chapter, and it's talking about two different visions of stars descending to heaven and becoming beings and dwelling amongst the beings and pretending to be the beings. All right, and here's another two passages. And Samyaza, who was their leader, said unto them, I fear ye will not indeed agree to do this deed, and I alone shall have to pay the penalty of a great sin. And they all answered him and said, Let us all swear an oath, and all bind ourselves by mutual imprecations not to abandon this plan, but to do this thing. Then swear they all together, and bound themselves by mutual imprecations upon it. And they were in all 200, who descended in the days of Jared on the summit of Mount Hermon, and they called it Mount Hermon because they had sworn and bound themselves by mutual imprecations upon it. That's Enoch chapter 6, verses 3 to 6. So in that passage, it is discussing the oaths that were taken, which correlates to the secret societies today. And Jesus mentions many times in the Bible that you should not take oaths of secrecy. Here, the leaders of the secret societies are doing just that thing to keep each other from getting in trouble. This is why we have rival factions of mafioso all over the place who work hand in hand, all under the umbrella that is Freemasonry. Okay, so it all goes back to oaths, taking an oath of secrecy, always being loyal to the oath above everything else. Because in this oath, they all are saying that the penalty of death or the penalty of having their tongues cut out shall be enforced. So this is how all the political leaders and all of the entertainers, that's how they have all been corrupted, because that's all of them. And they created the gods with their hands, as was said earlier, called money, and they worship that. The god that they made, that's what they worship. Alright, so before I go any further, I just want to explain that the fallen angels being stars, how is that possible? Alright, so if you look up at our stars today, you can see all of the ones that are lit up. You can see the moon, you can see the sun. They're all going as they are supposed to. They are lights. They are alive. We know the earth is alive, right? So it is all alive. It is a spirit. It is light. And when it came down here and took physical form, it had to leave the physical vessel it was in. And that physical vessel is now called asteroids. They're rocks. So we have the asteroid belt that's in between Mars and Jupiter. That is the former vessels for the fallen angels. That simple as that. Rocks, and we have the planets as well. They're lifeless. Well, maybe, I don't know if the planets are locked in place now, if they have the spirit in them. I think that they do, but we're talking about the asteroids, the asteroid belt that is in between Mars and Jupiter. They're all lifeless because those who used to dwell in those physical vessels are now here on Earth, being bulls amongst the cattle. They're being ox amongst the oxen. They're pretending to be something, and they're all sworn to an oath to each other to keep it going that way, to never ever stop it, to never ever give up on each other, to never give each other up to everybody else. That's what they're sworn by and bound by these things. That's why we are doing the things we're doing. So you can see that I'm walking you through from then to now, and how you can see the correlation of what I speak of, and how it is so very true for today's day and age, that the fallen angels are the ones that are still in control. And Enoch told us about it 3,000 plus years before Jesus was born. Right? I say before Jesus was born because obviously that's when BC, that's when the year 1 was around Jesus' life. So, that's a long time. Alright, so then here's the similarities of Nephilim and Neanderthals. They can't reproduce. They're much larger than humans. They lived in the same time period. They were similar to humans in many ways, and they're both very violent and aggressive. Alright, that's just in there from when we were talking about that in the introduction. Alright, and then you can, read all this. You can pause the video at any point, and you can read all of these. This is straight from the Book of Enoch. All of the different things. Okay, here chapter 7. And they became pregnant, and they bare great giants whose height was 3,000 ells, who consumed all the acquisitions of men, and when men could no longer sustain them, the giants turned against them and devoured mankind. And they began to sin against birds and beasts and reptiles and fish, and to devour one another's flesh and drink the blood. Then the earth laid accusation against the lawless ones. So it was doing all that, and then the earth was like, oh, that's enough. And I already went over all this stuff in the beginning title pages here. This is just... Oh, and so here are the giants that I was talking about earlier, the mountains that look like people. Now you can clearly see this looks like two beings about to kiss, and it looks like they were probably frozen in place by something that fossilized them immediately. Some kind of sun flare, some kind of, I don't know if a volcano could do it, but it's some kind of heat that was so hot that it just killed everything instantly and froze them in place. Here's some more. I mean, look at these guys. It's obvious. The one's in the middle, the one on the left, and the one on the right. Look at this guy. I've been connecting with this guy a lot lately, and because of my psychic third eye, I can pick up on consciousnesses being in non-physical vessels, and this one, because of the connection that I have to it in some way, I don't know who it is or what it is or anything, but in some way led me to understand that their souls are still here, thinking that they have to live here and that they're bound to the earth because they sold their soul to the devil, and the devil keeps them on earth, so they think that they can't go up to heaven, but through calling on the name of Jesus Christ, some of them have now been able to be freed and go to heaven. And then you got this one, on the right side there, it looks like a nose and a mouth, and it looks like on the left side is, like the nose and the mouth are running along. It looks like a neck in the middle, and then it goes up to like the breast area. And it looks like a sleeping giant. And here you got a dog. It looks like a dog and a snake. Again, rock, just petrified immediately, fossilized immediately. Rock is the only material that is not alive. It is dead material, and it's it doesn't have any life in it anymore. It's just fossils. And then you got this one is a cat. This one is very interesting. It looks like a sleeping cat, all curled up. You can see the eyes, you can see the nose, you can see the ears. Then you see little trees all growing on it. It's very interesting stuff. Here you got one, I think this is the same one, just from different angles, but it looks like an elephant. A massive, massive elephant. Just wild stuff. Alright, so then we have chapter 8. This is Azazel taught men how to make swords, knives, shields, breastplates, and all the metals. How to make bracelets and ornaments, which is jewelry, and beautifying of eyelids, and all kinds of costly stones, and all coloring tinctures, which is makeup. And they committed fornication and led astray and became corrupt in all of their ways. Samyaza taught enchantments and root cuttings, which spells and psychedelics. Armoros, you can read all this for yourself, but astrology, the constellations, teach them the secrets about what the environment means instead of letting humans figure it out for themselves. Chapter 11, and in those days I will open the store chambers of blessing which are in the heaven, so as to send them down upon the earth over the work and labor of the children of men. And truth and peace shall be associated together throughout all the days of the world and throughout all the generations of men. Alright, so this is talking about sending angels down here again to help children of men because we've been led astray by the fallen. Yeah, and this is, we already went over this. You can pause it if you want to read this, like I said earlier. But this is talking about Enoch seeing all the different horrible places. And again, chapter 69, verses 1 to 13. And after this judgment they shall terrify and make them to tremble, because they have shown this to those who dwell on the earth. This was in reference to Enoch's vision and him telling them, like, oh no, you guys aren't doing the right thing here. They were really scared by this. They didn't know. They thought that they were doing something good, but all their job was just to be watchers, just to be luminaries in the sky and watch us evolve. They weren't supposed to help. And because of that, they didn't listen. Well, that's why they're in trouble. So now we get to God and Enoch addressing the fallen. So Enoch is called the scribe, as I mentioned earlier, as he is the one who God tells things to, and he writes them down as a scribe does. He goes near Mount Hermon and reads their petition until he falls asleep. So he wakes up in their midst, amongst the watchers, and sees them all weeping. He begins to tell them his visions, and he then begins to reprimand the watchers. As he has created and given to man the power of understanding the word of wisdom, so hath he created me also and given me the power of reprimanding the watchers. Enoch 14:3. So, Enoch tells them, he's like, just as, he creates and gives anyone anything, he's created me and given me the power to tell you you're wrong. And so much so that they started crying. So in chapter 15, verse 6, God states that they were once immortal spiritual beings, again, the luminaries, the stars, who didn't need wise to carry on in the sense that man needed to reproduce in order to carry on, because they were immortal. They didn't, man has to keep his lineage going by having sex and reproducing. They didn't. This is directly pointing to them formerly being pure consciousness, as I stated in the beginning, that left heaven and entered Earth. I'm proposing the idea that they were the consciousness of stars and planets or wandering stars, the lifeless rocks that are now in the asteroid belt and that are locked in place in a cycle around the sun are the former vessels of these eternal, immortal beings. Without light or consciousness, these rocks are dead. With light or consciousness, they'd be stars, suns, and moons. And you just saw all the lifeless rock that appears to be humans and animals. And if they had life in them, then they wouldn't be rock. They'd still be moving, doing what they were designed to do in the first place. But the consciousness has left it for whatever reason. In the case of the mountains, it's because they were killed. In the case of the fallen, it's because they left. So chapter 15, verses 8 and 9 is describing the demiurge being born out of wisdom, which is a Gnostic belief, in different words, saying that since these giants were born out of lust and wrongdoing, they shall only have the spirit of lust and wrongdoing in them. For once they were wise, being born from wisdom, they were once wise, they bore children of complete ignorance, hatred, and defiling. They don't need to eat to stay alive, yet they have an insatiable hunger, thirst, and cause offenses. And they rise up against man and woman because they were born from them. So they hate man and woman because man and woman bound them here, because they became physical because of man and woman. But it wasn't man and woman that told them to come here and do that. But they hate us now, and they rebel against us and hurt us because we hurt them just by mingling with them, mixing with them. So yeah, they didn't even need to eat to stay alive, but they had this feeling in them of an unsatisfying feeling of, so they would just consume everything of this place because they thought that's what they needed. And it just wasn't true. They didn't need anything, so they started eating humans and drinking human blood, which was the closest, which, because they didn't like us, they started doing that, and it started getting them high in the sense that adrenochrome gets one high. It's a psychedelic feeling. So that's when they started finding out about all that. So chapter 16, God states that the Watchers weren't given all the secrets to heaven, and they weren't even given good secrets. They gave them away in order to sleep with women, and is essentially calling them pathetic. We're about to get to it in a moment here, but God's like, are you kidding me? You took the little bit of information I gave you and you used it to go sleep with some chicks. Like, I'm glad I didn't give you all the good information, because you proved that you couldn't be trusted, and because you couldn't be trusted, that's why you were only given some minor secrets in the first place. So here you go. Chapter 12 is talking about Enoch not being around because he was in the heavens doing all of this. Chapter 13, this is when he's reprimanding the Watchers. All of this as well. Whoop. Chapter 16, so here it is. From the days of the slaughter and destruction and death of the giants, from the souls of whose flesh the spirits having gone forth shall destroy without incurring judgment. Thus shall they destroy until the day of the consummation, the great judgment in which the age shall be consummated over the Watchers and the godless. Yeah, shall be wholly consummated. So they're saying that until the end, these fallen are going to continue to do their evil duties until the very end. So, that's why it seems to be getting worse and worse, even though we seem to be getting to the conclusion, it seems to be getting worse and worse because they're still doing what they're doing. So here we go, verse 2. And now as to the watchers who have sent thee to intercede for them, who had been aforetime in heaven, which, before they used to be in heaven, say to them, this is God telling Enoch, you have been in heaven, but all the mysteries had not yet been revealed to you, and you knew worthless ones. And these in the hardness of your hearts you have made known to the women, and through these mysteries women and men work much evil on earth. Say to them, therefore, you have no peace. So, you give away your secrets to have sex, you have no peace. So now we get to the angels. So you got Uriel, Raphael, Raguel, Michael, Sarah, Jael, I don't know, Gabriel, Remiel, Zotiel, Phanuel. And then you got the different types. You got the Ophanim, the Seraphim, and the Cherubim. And there's different ways to pronounce it, and different ways it's translated. But the Ophan, Sarah, and Cherub are the three base words, and then from there you can change the ending depending on where you translate it from and all that. So the angels are very upset with God for not allowing them to stop the fallen from doing what they are doing. They question why God is allowing these behaviors when God knows everything before it ever even happens. So they're just saying to God, they're like, what's the deal? You can stop anything, and you know it before it even happens, so why did you even allow it to happen? And they're doing a lot of the things that the humans do, questioning God and saying, they know better, that God shouldn't allow it. Maybe they're right, maybe they're wrong. Whatever, but it's showing that they have very human-like thoughts in this manner. Like, why is God allowing evil to occur? So here you got Enoch 33, chapter 33, verses 3 and 4. And I saw how the stars of heaven came forth, and I counted the portals out of which they proceed, and wrote down all their outlets of each individual star by itself, according to their number, and their names, their courses, and their positions, and their times and their months, as Uriel, the holy angel who was with me, showed me. He showed all things to me, and wrote them down for me. Also their names he wrote for me, and their laws and their companies. So this is Enoch saying that he saw the portals out of which the stars of heaven came down from. Stars of heaven, again, angels, fallen angels, stars of heaven, coming out of portals. You got, here's chapter 9, this is talking about all the angels. And here you go with 20, what I was telling you, Uriel, one of the holy angels who is over the world and over Tartarus. And you got the other ones. It takes, say, Raguel, one of the holy angels who takes vengeance on the world of the luminaries. Luminaries, again. Now it's over and over, it's repeated, but people just don't make the connection. Alright guys, well, I am going to end this part here, and then I will begin on the next part very soon. So I am so glad that you guys came to watch. If you like it, give it a like, give it a share, tell your friends about it, do whatever you would like. You can also check out my website. Again, the link will be in the description, EmmanuelKingman.com. Check out my podcast, the Godcast, the Goodness Over Darkness podcast. Check all of that out. And you have a wonderful day. Thank you for listening. Goodbye.